In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells the story of a guy who is traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And the thing about this guy is that on this journey, he gets attacked. A group of guys come upon him, attack him, beat him, steal his clothes, leave him on the side of the road to die and go on. And Jesus says that as the story goes, sometime later, another man, a different man, happens to be going down the same road. Now, this man was a priest, someone you would expect to stop and help someone who is on the side of the road dying, except this priest does not do that. Instead, he crosses to the other side of the road and he goes on his way. Jesus says another guy comes. This time it's a Levite. If you don't know what a Levite is or who a Levite is, Levites were people in the first century who helped priests, assisted priests in the temple. So again, someone you would think, kind of a holy person, you would think someone who would stop and help this guy. The Levite does the same thing, crosses the other side of the road, goes. It wasn't until Jesus says a Samaritan comes along that this guy who's laying on the side of the road, half dead, gets any help. Now that was shocking because we've talked a little bit about this. Jews and Samaritans didn't exactly get along, and yet it was the Samaritan that stopped and paused, bandaged the guy's wounds, cared for him, sent him to an inn so that he could rest and recuperate and get healthy. This would have been shocking at the time. It's not the passage that we're gonna look at tonight, but it would have been shocking at the time for Jesus' audience to hear that this Samaritan stopped to help a Jew. Now, the reason I'm telling that story is because in 1973, two researchers wanted to take that story, the parable, we know it as the parable of the Good Samaritan. They said, we wanna take that parable and we wanna put it into action. We wanna test it out on a college campus. We wanna see what happens. And so what they do is they go to Princeton Seminary. They get a group of seminary students, people training to go into vocational ministry, and they say, hey, what we want you guys to do is we want you to prepare a talk to give to a group of people. Seminary students are used to that kind of thing, so that's not shocking, that's not odd, that's okay, yeah, par for the course. And the thing about it is these researchers, they told this group of seminary students, some of you, they gave, the topic of their talk was the parable of the Good Samaritan. Others of them, though, they gave just kind of a random topic. Just a completely random topic. And then what they were told is after they prepared the talk, they had to go across campus to another building to give that talk to a group of people that had gathered there to hear what they'd come up with. The catch is that between the building they were in to prepare their talks and the building that they were going to give that talk was an alley. And in that alley, these researchers, they staged a guy who was clearly in distress. They had him slump over, they had him look like he was hurt, clearly in distress. Now the experiment, it wasn't the talk. It was the alley. It wasn't the talk, it was the alley. And here's what, you probably already know what they found, but what they found is that most of these seminary students, they didn't stop. When they went from that building that they prepared their talk to the building that they were going to give the talk, they didn't stop to help the guy in the alley. They didn't even glance down. They just went past him. Now, I just want to think about that for a second because here you have seminary students, people training to go into ministry, stepping over someone, passing by someone on their way to give a talk, some of them at least, to give a talk about not doing the very thing that they just did. It's ironic, right? It's ironic. They were too busy, too hurried. They wanted to look like the kind of people who would help, but they were actually, as it turns out, too hurried to actually slow down and help the person in need. Now, it's ironic, isn't it? I mean, when you stop to think about it, it's a bit humorous, but it's ironic. And there are a lot of different takeaways from this particular, it's become like a famous study, but there are a lot of different takeaways, but here's one takeaway, and it's this, that we can have, if we have it, We don't have it, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. We can have the right answers and still miss the actual point. We can have the right answers and still miss the actual point. And I think the reason that we often miss the point, the reason that we can have the right answers but we miss the point is because we're more concerned with how we appear than we are with who we actually are. A lot of times, if we're honest, it's an uncomfortable reality, but I think a lot of us miss the point sometimes because we're more concerned with how we appear than who we are. That's the thing that Jesus is going to press in on us tonight. It's the thing that Jesus is going to reinforce for us. If you've been tracking with us this semester, we've been going through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's a sermon that Jesus preaches when in the Gospel of Matthew chapters 5 through 7, Jesus preaches this sermon. And if you've been with us, you know that Jesus in this particular sermon, it's not a light and fluffy sermon, right? Like Jesus is not afraid to say the thing that makes you, probably all of us to some degree or another, makes us kind of uncomfortable, right? Because Jesus said, he doesn't pull punches, he says the thing. Whether it's how we are to love our enemies, or to how we're supposed to use our bodies, what we're supposed to do with our bodies, or like last week, how we use our words. See, Jesus is not afraid to say the thing that often makes us uncomfortable. But to think about what Jesus is gonna say to us tonight, he's less concerned, well, I shouldn't say less concerned, he's not as concerned tonight with what we do. Or maybe we could say he's not just concerned with what we do. He's also concerned with why we do it. He's also concerned with why we do it. Why we do what we do. Why do we do? Why do you do? Why do I do? Why do we do what we do? That's the question that Jesus is going to press in on tonight, okay? So we're gonna pick up. Do we have the slides? No? I don't know, you're waving at me. I don't know what this means. No slides, but I have the slides on my paper, so good. Okay, you're just gonna have to listen. If you have a Bible on your phone and you wanna track along, go ahead. This is gonna be hard because I have things that I wanted to point out on my slides. Shoot, old school, we're gonna read from a paper. Oh, we don't have your slides. Wow. If I actually looked at that thing, I would know. Cool. All right, here we go. This is Matthew 6, verse 1. This is Jesus. Jesus says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Okay, so I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna slow us down, especially since we can't see it. I'm just gonna say it. Jesus says, be careful. He says there's some danger here, right? There's danger. Jesus is warning us, okay? That's what I want you to catch first. Jesus is warning us there's danger. He says to not practice our righteousness. Jesus says, don't practice. Be careful not to practice your righteousness. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to practice your righteousness? I used to think that what Jesus is saying, like, practice righteousness. I used to think what Jesus is saying, like, hey, don't be self-righteous. Like, hey, be careful. Don't be a self-arrogant, self-righteous. Don't be an arrogant jerk, right? Don't look down on other people. Don't think you're better than them. It kind of reminds me of, there's this time where Jesus is talking about two other guys. And one of those guys, two guys go to pray, and one of those guys, this is in Luke 18, verse 11, he's a Pharisee, so he's a religious leader. Jesus says this about him. He says the Pharisee, when he goes to pray, he stands by himself. You get this image of this Pharisee, this religious leader, he's standing by himself, apart from other people. And it says that he prays like this. He says, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, like robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even like this other guy, this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all I get. See, I used to think that when Jesus is saying, be careful, don't practice, be careful to not practice your righteousness. I used to think that Jesus is kind of saying, hey, don't be like that guy. But that's not actually what Jesus is doing. That's not who he's talking about. See, when Jesus says, be careful not to practice your righteousness, Jesus is actually talking about doing good things. Practicing your righteousness. Another way that we could say that is like, that's the good things that we do to obey God. Doing right things, practicing righteousness. Jesus is saying, be careful to not do good things for God in front of other people. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. Be careful not to do good things that obey God in front of other people. But I don't know if you're like me, the second I hear that, the second I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Jesus is warning us. He's saying there's danger when we practice our right, when we do good, when we obey God in front of other people. That doesn't make any sense, because didn't Jesus say just the opposite earlier in this sermon? So Matthew 5:16, you guys might remember these verses. This is what Jesus says. Listen to what he says. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. In the same way, let your light shine before other people so that they would see your good deeds and give glory to God who is in heaven. Isn't that a contradiction? Like, Jesus, what do you want? Do you want me to let my light shine in front of other people? Or do you want me to be careful not to practice my righteousness in front of others? Like, which one is it? It's one of those times, it's not an either or, it's actually a both and, because look at, or pay attention, listen to, I guess, what Jesus says right after. I know I'm giving you a lot of verses, but just track with me, because this is what Jesus says right after he warns us not to practice our righteousness in front of other people. He says, don't do that in order to be seen by them. I'm gonna read the whole sentence. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. See, what I want you to catch is that what Jesus is saying is it's possible to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And when we do the right thing for the wrong reasons, it makes the right thing wrong. Don't practice your righteousness. Don't do good in front of other people just to be seen by them. See, it's interesting. Jesus is concerned with not just what we do, he's concerned with why we do it, which is to say our motives matter. Motive matters. And Jesus is saying something I think kind of uncomfortable to us in college, because Jesus is saying, hey, here's the reality. Some of us are motivated by being seen. Some of us are motivated by being seen. We do good things because we want people to see us as good, respectable, worthy. Fill in the blank, right? We do good and we want other people to see it because we want other people to think a particular way about us. Reminds me of the time, I think I've shared this story in different contexts before, but I was at a coffee shop downtown, probably, I don't know, shortwave or something, and I sat at a table next to another table, and I noticed a group of people spend probably 5 minutes, I don't know, maybe it was even longer than that, getting the perfect shot of their Bible and their coffee. Right? Like that, the whole 5 minutes was just, how can I maneuver my Bible, open it to the right, I don't know what chapter and verse it was, right? Philippians 4:13 in my coffee, and this whole thing, like a group of people just having this little Instagram session. And here's the crazy thing is, as soon as the picture gets posted, you know what happened in the Bible? Close it, right? Didn't read it, didn't talk about it, just wanted the picture. And I think, I'm not trying to pick on that person, because I've done some version, well, I haven't done that, but I've done some version of that. But if you've done that, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I'm just trying to say, isn't it true, if we're honest, like if I'm honest with you, there's a bit of me that's in that, right? And I think if you're there, I think if you're honest too, there's a part of you that's in that too. Maybe not that exact thing, but sometimes we want to be seen with our Bibles more than we want to actually read our Bibles. We want to be seen as spiritual. We want to be seen as holy. We want to be seen as pious and following God and doing good things and being good people more than we want to actually get to know God. And Jesus is saying to us, he's saying to me, he's saying, Kyle, be careful.
be careful. There's danger when we put ourselves at the center of the story. That's very countercultural, isn't it? Jesus is saying, look, be careful. There's danger when you think you're the most important part of the story. Our culture tells us that's exactly it, right? Like, you are the main character. You are the hero. Like, be that. Jesus is saying, no, there's danger. There's danger. This is the danger. If you practice your righteousness in front of other people just to be seen by them, if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. No reward from your Father in heaven. And so the question is, it's not rather, are you and I, are we doing good things? It's who are we doing these good things for? Right? Are you doing good things? That's a different talk for a different day. But Jesus is getting at, who are you doing the good that you do? Presumably, you're doing good. Who are you doing it for? And this is where Jesus, for the rest of this passage, Jesus is going to get real practical with this. It's going to be uncomfortable, but he's going to get real practical. He's not going to live in abstract theory land. He's going to get right down concrete, and he's going to give us some examples. He's going to give us some examples that expose our motives. He's going to give us some examples that force us to kind of wrestle with, ask the question, kind of internally do some reflection, like, what's going on inside me right now? Why do I do what I do? Okay, so this is what Jesus says, picking up verse 2. Still no slides. We're not going to have them the whole time, are we? I see a no. Big down thumb. Boo. Okay, 6:2, verses 2 and 3. Jesus says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. Now, what I would want you to notice, if you could see it, is that Jesus starts with an assumption. And that assumption that Jesus starts with is this: when you give. It's not if you give, it's when you give. Now, I don't know about you, but already I'm starting to feel that uncomfiness, right? Like, some of us, we need to be challenged by what Jesus is saying, because I think that some of us, maybe a lot of us in this context, we hear Jesus' words here in verse 2 and we assume Jesus is talking about someone else. That you is not me, it's you, right? Like, when you give to the needy, but Jesus, we assume that it's for someone else, but Jesus is not talking to someone else. He's talking to me and he's talking to you. He's talking to all of us. And he's not qualifying it. He just says, when you give to the needy. Now, he doesn't say, hey, I know you're in college and money is tight. I know you're in college right now, or you don't have a steady job, or you're still getting money from mom and dad, or he doesn't say any of that. It just says, when you give. Now, we could fill that out. We could say, when you give your money, or when you give your time, or when you give yourself. But it's not an if, it's a when. And so I'm gonna pause just to let the uncomfortable, question sit there. Like, do you do that? Right? Do you give? Have you been challenged to give before? Like, do you give to you're a part of the church, you come to the church, you're around the church, you're involved in things, like, are you giving? I'm not saying how much, I'm just asking the question, do you give? Do you give? Do you serve? Are you spending your time giving back? Are you spending your time, your talent? The reality is this is part of what it means to follow Jesus. This is not just like for some people, right? Like the super Christians give and the super Christians serve. No, Jesus says, look, here's the deal. This is what it means to follow me when you give to the needy, right? Part of what it means, not the sum total of what it means, but part of what it means to follow Jesus is to give of our time and our talent and our treasure to people who are in need. That's part of practicing our righteousness. And the thing about it is Jesus doesn't seem to be saying it's optional. So maybe we need to take him at his word and start to question whether or not it's time for us to start giving back. Maybe that's a question that you need to sit with tonight. Where am I giving? Am I giving? Where? Of my time, of my talent, of my limited, I get it, limited resources. But again, Jesus doesn't qualify it. But remember, Jesus isn't asking so much the what, he's asking the why, right? Jesus is trying to get at our motives, which is why Jesus goes after motive and starts talking about hypocrisy. Jesus starts saying, look, he says, look, don't be a hypocrite. Now, we use that word differently. We use that word differently in our culture than they used it back then. In our culture, hypocrite, it's kind of synonymous with like inconsistent, yeah? So if I say someone's being a hypocrite, typically what we mean is that that person says one thing and does another, yeah? Like they say one thing and do another. That's being a hypocrite. But that's not what being a hypocrite was in the first century. Actually, in the first century, that word hypocrite, it comes from a Greek word that means actor, or literally like someone who wears a mask. So Greek theater, huge, big part of the culture. And, in these plays, there's all sorts of different characters, but there's not a lot of actors. And so what actors had to do to represent these different characters is they had to wear different masks. And I would have showed you a picture of all these different masks that these different actors wear, but the point is to change characters, you just put on a different mask, right? That's a pretty simple idea. But the point being, you pretended to be someone else. That's what it means to be a hypocrite in Jesus' context. You're pretending to be something you aren't. And so track with me, go back to giving, because what Jesus is saying when we give, he says, look, when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets. That's what the hypocrites do. When you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets. Now, we don't know if people were literally like giving and playing a trumpet, or if Jesus is just making like this kind of ridiculous metaphorical statement to kind of drive the point home. But he says, don't announce it with trumpets. That's what the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets. Why do they do that? To be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. What Jesus is saying is, he's saying, look, don't pretend like you're honoring God when really you're just honoring yourself. When you give to the needy, don't be a hypocrite. Don't pretend. Don't put on a mask. Don't play a trumpet. Don't say, look at me. Don't pretend like you're doing this righteous thing for God, this God-honoring devotion thing for him, when really you're doing it to say, hey, look at me, I'm a pretty big deal. See how much money I gave? Jesus is getting at our motives. Instead, Jesus says, don't do that. Instead, he says, this is verse 3 and 4, he says, when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be done in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And so the question is, when we give, right? Not if, when we give, what is our motive? When you give, do you want honor? Are you giving to be seen? Or are you giving because you want to honor God? Two different people give, right? Two different people give. A needy person gets that giving, right? Two different people with two very different motives. And Jesus says there's two very different rewards. Which one do you want? Which one do you want? It's uncomfy, I know, but he keeps going. He says, okay, let's try another one. He says, verse 5, he says, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. What do the hypocrites do? They love to stand in the synagogues and on the street corners. Why? Shocker, to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. Jesus is saying, look, hypocrites, this is kind of the point, right? Hypocrites love to perform. They love to be seen. They love the praise. They love the attention. They love the look at me and the applause and the clapping. Jesus says, don't pray like that. Don't be like the hypocrites who just want to be seen. You know, it's interesting when I get to preach every once in a while on Sunday mornings here at our church. And the first time that I ever preached a sermon here, a few days after, like, I don't know, call it Wednesday or so, I got something in my mailbox. Now, it was odd because it was an envelope, which should be in my mailbox, yes. But it was odd because it was super nondescript, right? So there's no handwriting on it. There was no return address. I don't even remember there being a stamp, which is kind of weird. How did it get there? But it was pretty nondescript. And so I remember getting this in my mailbox thinking, like, this is kind of weird. It's just like, it had like a typed like label on the envelope with just my name on it. And I remember, like, I have no idea what this thing is going to be. But I opened it, and it was a little weirder even once I opened it because it was a bunch of cut up pieces of paper. What on earth is happening? Still, no handwriting, have no idea what this is. I start looking, I like pulling these pieces of paper out, and they're like, cut kind of weird shapes, and I'm like, what is this, like some kid's project? But it wasn't that. I started looking at, and these pieces of paper, they had different writings on them. And some of the writings, when I actually started to pay attention to them, I realized, oh, this is like what my sermon was about. Like someone typed, I guess, out on a typewriter some notes from my sermon and then cut it up and put it in an envelope. And then some of it was like devotional like clippings, like they'd been reading some other devotional and you could see like, oh, I made a connection, like this is what this devotional said and this is what your sermon said, and look at how these, and then there's always a longer one, and that longer one, it was a prayer. It was a prayer. It was a prayer for me. It was a prayer for our church. It was a prayer for anybody who heard the sermon. And then at the end of the prayer, it was signed, typed, closet prayers of the unseen. That's all it said. Closet prayers of the unseen. Still to this day, I get one every time I preach a sermon. I have no idea who sends it. I have no idea who puts it together. It could be you. I have no idea who it is. Who put this thing together, who cuts these things out, who types on a typewriter, who puts an envelope in my mailbox. I have no idea who's praying. But there's something really beautiful. And every pastor who preaches gets the same thing. We have no idea, truly no idea. Nobody, and I found out this has been happening as long as a church. So 20 plus years, this has been happening. Someone's been doing these things, putting these things in our mailbox. And it's a little bit weird, but it's also really beautiful, isn't it? Right? Because like this person could totally be like, hey, Kyle, I wanted you to know that here's what I thought about your sermon, and here's who I talked to about how it was helpful, and here's a different thought that I had as I was thinking more about it, and this is what the Spirit is doing, and this is a prayer it's always a good prayer. This is a prayer that I'm praying for you, and I'm praying for our church. I mean, that would be a totally normal thing for someone to say to a pastor. But this person doesn't care about any of that. It's like they read this verse. And they know that Jesus says, when you pray, go into your room and close the door and pray to your Father who's unseen. Then your Father who sees what's done in secret, he will reward you. Now, here's the question. Does this mean, Kyle, are you trying to tell me, or is Jesus trying to say, look, I can't pray in public? Well, no, of course not, right? Like, Jesus is not saying don't pray at small group, or don't pray in public, or don't pray with your friends or family or boyfriend, girlfriend. Jesus isn't saying that. Remember, He's not getting at the what, he's getting at the why. He's saying, why do we pray? Why do we pray? Do we pray to be seen by other people? When I pray, do I start using words that I don't normally use to be impressive? Do I go on and on and on and on because I want you to just think how spiritual I am, and gosh, he really knows how to pray, and I wish I could be, like, is that how we pray? Or do we just have a conversation with our Father in heaven? One more, third one. Jesus says, this is verse 16. He says, when you fast, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. There's that word again, right? Jesus, well, we have verses. Have those been there for a while? Okay, cool, thanks. Right, there's that word again. When you fast, right? Not if you fast. Jesus assumes we fast. We don't fast, we brunch, yeah? So we already are being challenged. But we live in a culture, right? Think about this. We live in a culture that is constantly consuming. And I don't just mean food, I mean all the things, right? All the things. So the idea of intentionally going without something, that's what fasting, if you're like not quite sure what Jesus is getting at, Jesus is saying, look, intentionally going without something. Right? We live in this culture where we're constantly consuming. And so the idea that we would intentionally go without something as essential as food, it's not only weird, it's kind of offensive. Like, why would we do that? Why would we do that? Well, again, different sermon, different day, but the point is that Jesus is saying, look, we do that because it's a way of showing our devotion to him. We fast because when we go without a very good thing, right? We're not saying fast from something bad. We're saying, look, when we fast, we go without something that we could rightfully have, but we say, I don't want this, I want you, God. That's why we fast. But Jesus is getting at not the what, he's getting at the why. See, Jesus knows we like being seen doing the right things. He knows that we want credit for doing the spiritual disciplines. We want people to know that we care. We want people to know that we're faithful. We want people to know that we're trying. The problem, though, is that we become like those first century actors, and we kind of end up making faith one big show. And the problem with it is that Jesus isn't impressed by it. We think we're very impressive people. Jesus is saying, not so much. When you fast, he picks up verse 17. When you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret, he will reward you. I love Jesus here. He just says, just wash your face. Like, just wash your face. Like, stop being pretentious. Like, no fanfare, no celebration, no happy clappy, no like, hey, look at me, no performance. Just devotion to me. Wash your face and carry on with your day. Don't make it about you. That's kind of the thing. Jesus says kind of repeatedly, like, man, I've just been sitting with these verses and it's hard. Like, Jesus keeps saying the same thing over and over and over. One way or another, he's saying, look, those of us who practice our righteousness to be seen, he says, that is your reward. When you practice, when we do good things to be seen by other people, Jesus says, look, you receive your reward. In other words, he's saying, congratulations, you get the applause. People notice you, they're impressed with you. They might even admire you, but he says, that's it. Like, that's the whole reward. That's all there is. I've been thinking about Hamilton lately. Some of my friends, I think about Hamilton a lot, actually, but some of my friends recently went and saw Hamilton in Kansas City. I don't know if you've seen Hamilton. It's amazing. I got to see it in Broadway and cried the whole way through, but that's not the point. The point is, what happens if you've not seen Hamilton? It doesn't matter. You're going to get the point. You've been to a musical, you've been to a show, maybe you haven't. You're like, dude, that's not my vibe. I get it. It wasn't mine either, and then I got married. But here we are. I digress. At the end of a show, at least you know this, right? You know this to be true. At the end of a show, what happens at the end of a musical? Right? Yes, thank you. The actors come out, the lights get real bright, everybody loses their mind. People clap, people cry, people do all the weird things. But then what happens? They bow, and then what do? They turn around and they walk away. And the lights fade, and the actors go backstage and they take the makeup off and we all go home and we forget about it by the next day. See, the applause, it was loud, it was crazy, it was fun. I was wrapped up in the moment. But it doesn't last. It's kind of what Jesus is getting at. He's saying, look, is that the reward? Man, it's so tempting. It'd be great if a room full of people would just applause for me. But is that, no, don't do that. Is that really, I'm not mad, that's funny. Is that the applause that we want? Like, is that the kind of reward that we're living for, to be seen by other people? I want you to think I'm so impressed. Like, it almost sounds so ridiculous when we just say it out loud. But how true of me, how true of us maybe? I don't know your story, but my guess is you're kind of like me, right? It's us a lot. Jesus saying, man, if that's how you live, that's the reward you get, and it doesn't last. It feels really good for that minute. It feels really good for that week. It feels really good for that year. It feels really good, but it doesn't really last. I've got a better reward for you, he says. See, the beauty of the gospel, we talk about the good news of the gospel, that's what that word gospel means, is that we don't have to perform to be seen by our Father in heaven. Nick was talking about this at the beginning of the music set. You already are. I mean, think about that. Believe that, because it's true. You already are. Not because you did anything impressive, but because Jesus did, right? The only truly righteous one didn't practice his righteousness for us to admire. He gave of himself, oftentimes in secret. He fasted in the wilderness. He prayed in solitude. Ultimately, Jesus, he goes to the cross. Why? Not to be applauded. Jesus didn't go to the cross to die to be applauded. No, he goes to the cross and dies to rescue you and rescue me. The Apostle Paul, he writes a letter, a lot of letters, but one of the letters he writes to a group of Christians in the Galatia area. So it's the letter of Galatians. And he says, he asks a question that I think about this all the time. He says, look, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? He's responding to some criticism that he was getting in the first century, that he cared more about what people thought of him. And so he just asked the question. He writes this in the Bible. He says, look, am I trying to win the approval of humans or am I trying to win the approval of God? Which I think is his way of wrestling with, why do I do what I do? And it's his way of asking us to ask that same question, why do you do what you do? Right? Motive matters. Motive matters. And Jesus is trying to transform our motivations. But here's the thing about transforming motivations. We don't transform our motives by trying harder. You will not transform your motives by just trying harder. That's not the point. No, the point is to transform your motives by remembering what's already been done for you. This truth, this beautiful reality, this good news that in Jesus, you are fully seen. In Jesus, you are fully known by your Father in heaven. Jesus is not calling you to be impressive. He's inviting you to rest in the approval that's already yours. And here's the thing, the reward, it's not applause, it's the kingdom. It's the kingdom. Remember what he said earlier when he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's not the spiritually impressive. It's the dependent, right? It's not the performers, it's the humble. It's not those of us who are good at wearing a mask. No. Jesus says, no, it's the ones who know that they need mercy. See, Jesus is the only reason that we can stop. We can finally stop. Some of us just need to be given permission. Just stop. You don't have to keep performing. Man, when you start to believe that, it's really good news. You don't have to keep performing. The only reason you can do that is because Jesus already is your reward. So think about that. Think about this tonight when you leave. What I want you to think about is this. Don't let the crowd be your motive. Don't let the crowd, let the cross, let that be your motive. Not the crowd, the cross. Let me pray that would be true of us. Jesus, I just confess to you that, gosh, why do I do what I do? I do it because I want to be seen. I want the applause. I want to be impressive. I want the praise. I pretend all the time because I think that's what will get me what I really want. I need passages like these. I need uncomfortable truths. I need you to get deeper than the surface into my heart, to force me to wrestle with that question of what are my motives? Why do I do what I do? And my guess is there are a lot of people in the room that are just like that. And so I pray that we would have the courage to be honest with you. That we would have the courage to be honest with ourselves and with other people, that we would not hide in shame and in darkness, but we would bring that into the light so that you would transform those parts of us that want to be seen by other people into people who want to be seen and known and loved by you. Jesus, may that be true in our lives. Help us to love you. It's in your name we pray.